Hi guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be solving week 8 biology AMS. So let's begin. Which of the following factors limit the rate of photosynthesis? So when we have such type of question, let's remind ourselves with the formula of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis was the process that plants make their own food. How did they do that? They need carbon dioxide and water along with sunlight energy to produce C6H12O6, which is glucose, and 6O2. Now, if you remember, how did CO2 enter the plant? Remember, it was through the stomata, okay, and the water through the roots, and of course, sunlight is absorbed by the leaves. So let's look at the question. The availability of oxygen, that's incorrect. Remember, oxygen is needed for cellular respiration. The availability of carbon dioxide, that is correct. The temperature is also correct because remember, photosynthesis is a series of reactions that need enzymes, and these enzymes function best at a specific temperature. The opening and closing of the stomata, of course, because that interacts with how much carbon dioxide is entering, and the light intensity, because as we said, we need sunlight energy. Okay, plants are subjected to one-sided elimination to describe how plants respond to a stimulus. So I'm going to talk about two stuff or more than one thing in this question. So first, what is a stimulus? A stimulus is any change in the environment. Okay, so it's a change in the environment. And living organisms, one characteristic of living organisms is that they can respond to this stimulus. Now, what do we call the ability to detect such stimulus? We call it sensitivity. Okay, so sensitivity is the ability to respond and detect stimulus. Okay, this is the first concept we want to talk about. Now, the other thing we want to talk about is here we're trying to test because we have a light proof box and we're only allowing light to enter from one specific place. So we're checking the effect of directional lighting on the growth of the plant. That's why we chose the aim of the experiment is to show that a young shoot responds to directional lighting. This is our experimental. Now, in the other one, we call it our control group. Why? Because if we look at the clinostat, what is the function of the clinostat? It rotates. So as it rotates, it allows light to attack. No, light is going to be hitting the plant from all directions and not only from one direction. So this is why it's our control group. Control system, as we said, the clinostat because it keeps on turning. And which hormone is responsible for the bending of the shoot? It is the auxin. Just a quick reminder. So one of the plant hormones that is responsible for plant elongation is auxin. So auxin is a plant hormone that is responsible for plant elongation. Okay? And usually what happens, so let's say I have a plant. Okay, let's say this is my plant. This is such a terrible plant, but okay. We have sunlight from this direction only. Okay? So what's going to happen? The auxins, I'm gonna put them in dark green, they're gonna build up on the shaded side. This is the side that is exposed. Let me show it to you. Here, this side is exposed to sunlight. This is the shaded part. Okay? So the auxins will build up on the shaded side. Pay attention to it. They build up on the shaded side. And because they build up on the shaded side, they're going to cause the plant to bend towards the direction of the light. And remember, what do we call the process or the response to light? We call it phototropism. Now we can have negative or positive. Okay, So positive is when we bend toward the direction of the light, and negative away from the light. So an example for negative, it will be the roots, right? Because the roots will go downwards while the sun is up. This is negative phototropism because they're going away from the sunlight. However, the leaves or the tree itself, if I put light, you can see it in a forest. You can see some trees that are bent in a specific direction. They are usually bent towards the direction of light, and we call it positive phototropism. Okay, let's go next. Now, gravitropism. The opposite, here phototropism responds to changes in light. Gravitropism, from its name, it's going to respond to gravity. Okay, so responds to gravity. And again, we can have positive gravitropism and negative. So always remember, gravity is where gravity direction downward. Okay, so gravity, the direction is downward. So roots grow in a direction downwards. So roots show positive gravitropism, while the stem itself or the tree itself, they grow upwards, while gravity is downwards. So they're opposing, they're going in the direction opposite of gravity. So that's why we call it negative gravitropism. So let's look at the options. We can also call gravitropism geotropism. It is a tropic response to gravity, and it can either be negative or positive. Phototropism, as we said, toward a light source, we call it phototropism. It's necessary for plants to perform photosynthesis. Why is it necessary? Because remember, as we mentioned here, we need sunlight for photosynthesis, so they have to grow in a direction towards sunlight. And we have negative phototropism, as we said, is there to firmly anchor the roots in the soil. To make a bread, a baker mixes yeast with sugar and blends this with flour to make a dough. After 2 hours, the dough rises and expands. So, since we have yeast and we have it rising, we're going to directly think of fermentation. So, that's why the dough rises, because CO2 is being released. Okay, and we call this alcoholic fermentation. Now, of course, alcoholic fermentation does not occur in our bodies. Rather, we have lactic acid fermentation. When we exercise, there's accumulation of lactic acid, which causes our muscles to feel sore. Okay, so here they're just explaining what auxin is. It's a type of plant hormone produced by the shoot tip and diffuses downward to other parts of the shoot. Placed on its side, the root has bent downward and the stem has bent upward. What is the main function? As we said, the function of the auxin is what? To stimulate plant elongation. Now, the shoot is exposed to light only from the top side. Remember, we said the auxin builds up on the shaded part. That's why here we said more auxin accumulates at the shaded side, which causes this region to elongate faster, resulting in the bending of the stem upward toward the light source. Because remember, the light was from the top side only. Now, in the root cells elongate at a slower pace under high auxin concentrations. This is important to note. So, auxin at a high concentration will allow the stem to grow fast, while at a high concentration it will cause the roots to elongate at a slower pace. Okay? And that's why more auxin will accumulate on the lower side of the root. The upper side that has less auxin elongates the most and causes the root to bend downward. So why does the part that elongates the most have less auxin? This is just how it works. The auxin hormone, it's a plant hormone, affects the stems differently than the roots. So pay attention to that. Okay, the process by which some living organisms, okay, this is easy. They're just telling us how plants produce their food by photosynthesis and the role of glucose. We use it to make starch, for cellulose, and oxygen is released into the environment. Okay, so those are just the parts of the plant. They protect the flower when it's okay. I'm gonna show you the image you have in your book. So this is the image we have. So we have the sepals. There are green structures. They usually function to protect the plant, okay, or the flower. Now we have the petals, and as you guys can see, the petals are usually colorful and they sometimes have a scent. And this is important, and we're going to see later on why it's important, because for pollination by insects, the insects are attracted to this colorful flower where it has a nice smell, and that's why the insects will come and be able to transfer the pollen from one plant to another, which we'll look at very soon. Then we have the anther and the filament. Now the anther and the filament make up what? The stamen. What is the stamen? It's the male part of the flower. Over here is where pollen grains are produced, okay, and where they are found. While the female part of the flower is called the carpel. Now what does the carpel contain? It contains the stigma, the style, and the ovary, and inside the ovary we have the ovules. Okay, so we'll look at the functions of them also in this question. So they protect the flower against insects, fungi, is the sepals. Holds the stigma in best position to receive the pollen grains. Of course, it's going to be the style. Because look at the style, it's holding the stigma, which is at the top. The style holds it in the best position. It's brightly colored, darkly. Whenever you see brightly colored, is the petals. Found at the base of the petals and produces a sugar solution. Whenever you see sugar solution, darkly think of nectar, so nectarine. The male organs, we said the stamen, which contains the anther and the filament. Pollen sacs, you're darkly going to be thinking about the male part, which is the anther. What holds the anther in position? As you guys can see, it's the filament holding the anther where the pollen grains are going to be found. Contains one or more ovules. Of course, the ovary contains one or more female gametes, are the ovules. The female organs, we said it's the carpel, and serves as stick platform where pollen lands on. It's going to be the stigma. And now we will see later on how the pollen here will stick on the stigma and then pass through to go to the ovary and then to the ovules. Okay. So, before we do this, I'm just going to explain the general idea. Okay? So, we introduced the male part of the flower and the female part of the flower. Now, why did we explain this? Because plants need to undergo reproduction, right? So they can undergo two types of reproduction, and some plants can even perform both of these two types. Okay? What are these two types? They can go for asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction. And now we'll also be looking at differences. So, but let's try to think about them together. So asexual reproduction, we only have one parent is involved. So since we have one parent is involved, of course, the offspring are going to be genetically identical to that parent because it's only one parent. While when we talk about sexual reproduction, we have two parents that are involved. Okay? So two parents involved, which are the male and the female. Now, the male and the female part can be found on the same flower. If male and female are found on the same flower, we call it a bisexual flower. But sometimes they are found on the same plant, but in different locations. Okay? And they could, what's it called? They could be found on two completely different plants. Okay? Now, let's talk, we're going to focus on sexual reproduction where two parents are going to be involved. So we have the male part and the female part. The male part we said is the stamen. which is made up of the anther and filament, while the female part, we're going to call it carpel, and it's made up of the stigma, style, and ovary. And in the ovary, we have the ovules. Okay, so the male gametes are going to be found in the anther, which are the pollen grains. So the pollen grains are the male gametes. Okay? While in the ovary, we have ovules, and in the ovules, we have the eggs, which are the female gametes. Now, what's our purpose for this? Now, what we want to happen is we want the pollen from the male part, okay, to reach where? To reach the eggs, which are the female gametes, and I want them to fuse together. Once they fuse together, remember we call this process fertilization, and after fertilization, we get a zygote. Okay? So the way I'm gonna transfer this pollen grains to this eggs, so the transfer of pollen, what do we call it? The transfer of pollen, we call it pollination. Now I have two methods of pollination. It can be self-pollination, so the same plant, or cross-pollination between different. Now in cross-pollination, we have two things that are responsible for cross-pollination, which are wind and insects. Which is going to take us back to this question. If we have large colored, of course, the insects will be attracted to it. Sticky pollen grains. Why is it insect pollinated? Because the pollen will stick on the insect, and then the insect's going to travel to another plant and drop that pollen. Now, when it's numerous and small light pollen grains, if they're light, they can be transferred easily by wind. Many guidelines, of course, the insect is going to follow these guidelines to reach the pollen. That's why it's going to be insect pollinated. Feather-like stigmas, of course, it's going to be wind, and the stamens are protruding out of it, so since they're out to the open, it will be easy for the wind to pick the pollen up. Okay, cross-pollination provides a survival advantage. Therefore, many plants have adaptations that prevent self-pollination. Some plant species have the stigma at a much higher level, than the anthers in the flower, so the chances of accidental self-pollination are minimized. Some species recognize pollen from the same plant and prevent it from fertilizing from the same plant, prevent from other plants' eggs. In other species, the ovules mature before the anther ripen and split open. So here they're just teaching us why cross-pollination provides a survival advantage. Why does it provide a survival advantage? Because we are having a variety. We're cross-pollinating different plants, so we're gonna have a genetic variation, which is important for survival. Okay, and these are just ways how plants prevent self-pollination. Okay, this is the steps for fertilization. First, of course, the pollen grain should land on the stigma. After it lands on it, the stigma produces chemicals that enable the pollen grain to grow a pollen tube. I can show you the image. I think it's better to explain it. With the image. Okay, I can show it from here. So what's going to happen? Or let me just, okay. So here, let me just draw it for you guys. So we have, this is our, here's gonna be the stigma, okay, which is sticky. So this is stigma, and then this is the style, which holds the stigma in position. And then this is the ovary, and these are the ovules that have the eggs inside. Okay, so what's going to happen? For example, let's say it was an insect pollinated plant. I'll have an insect, okay, just imagine this is the insect, and it carries the pollen. This insect is gonna land here, and since the pollen will drop and it will stick on the stigma. So once the pollen is now on the stigma, what's going to happen? A chemical is going to be released, which is going to help form what we call a pollen tube. So a pollen tube will start forming, which would allow it to enter to one of the ovules. Okay? So the pollen grain lands on the stigma. The stigma produces chemicals that enable the pollen grain to grow a pollen tube. The pollen tube goes down through the style and toward an ovule inside the ovary, as we drew exactly right here. Then, the male gamete travels in the pollen tube through the ovary to reach the ovule. Now, we have the male gamete is gonna travel through to enter the ovule. Then, the male gamete reaches an ovule and enters through a small hole called the micropyle. Okay, you have to know it. I don't know why this isn't working, but there is an image that can help. Okay, here's the image. Okay, so as you can see, the pollen lands, we have a pollen tube forming. The male gamete will reach the ovule through the pollen tube. This is the female gamete. And then the male gamete will enter through this opening called the micropyle and fuse with the female gamete. Once it fuses with the female gamete, we form a zygote, and this process is what we call fertilization. Okay, this is also easy. Winged, anything light is by wind. Something that many hooks, that means they can stick on animals that are soft and tasty. Of course, animals. Here we're talking about the way seeds are dispersed. So way seeds can be dispersed are three ways: by wind, by animals, and by explosive fruits. Okay, so know these three examples for seed dispersal. Okay, choose the part of the seed described in each case. So I'm gonna try to look for the image for the seed, but mainly for that type of question, you just have to memorize each function for each part of the seed, the function of it. So the tough waterproof outer coat, we call it the testa. Then specialized seed leaves that store food. Whenever you see store food, it will be the cotyledons. And remember, monocots have one, while dicots have two. A hole in the seed, we just said micropyle. The scar is the hilum, and a developing plant made up of radicle, we call it the embryo. Okay? This is just explaining pollination and fertilization. We already did it in a different question. Okay, this is also the same thing for insect pollination and wind pollination. And please make sure you know the examples for each. And this is just labeling. We already did the labeling of, this is a bisexual flower. That means it has both the male part and the female part. Okay, this is also easy. Here, since you have the filaments, as you can see, they're protruding to the outside. That means it will be easy for the wind to take them. It's not found in the middle. If it's in the middle and enclosed, it will be hard for the wind. But since they're protruding to the outside, it will be easily, a pollinating agent would be wind. Okay, so stamen, remember, is the male reproductive part, where the carpel is the female reproductive part of the organ. The stamen, remember, it's made up of anther and filament, as here. The carpel, remember, style, ovary, and stigma. Anther, we said, has the pollen sacs filled with pollen grains, while ovary has the ovules, one or more ovules. Okay, here, because they said on the same plant, it's going to be self-pollination. And remember the question we did before, how we prevent self-pollination of the same species, but what did they say? From one flower, from the anther of one flower to the stigma of a flower on another plant. So two different plants, cross-pollination. Transfer of pollen from the anther of one flower to the stigma of the same flower. Since we're still on the same flower, it's self-pollination. Okay, for germination, we need three important factors: oxygen, water, and a warm temperature. Usually a warm temperature for the enzymes to be able to function. Okay? So no, germination, we need oxygen, water, and a specific range of temperature. Okay. We talked about asexual and sexual. Remember, in asexual, they're going to be genetically identical to the parent, which isn't good because they won't be able to adapt to changing environments. However, in sexual reproduction, they have a genetic variation which will help them in occupying a variety of habitats. So let's look. Asexual reproduction, unlikely for new plants to colonize new areas because new plants grow close to the parent. That is true. But an advantage would be newly formed plants have a large supply of food, and this enables them to grow quickly. While for sexual reproduction, they're going to be different from their parent, and the seeds must be produced in large numbers to ensure some reach areas that are suitable for germination and growth. Because they are not aware of the land they're in, they need to produce a larger number of seeds so they can test different lands and find where the best land is for them to be able to germinate and grow. Okay, so here we were testing the effect of gravity. Okay, always remember this is the clinostat and it keeps on turning, so it cancels the effect of gravity. So this is why it's the control setup. And the radicals, of course, they're going to go downward. Why? In response to gravity. So since gravity is going downwards, the roots will go downwards because they show, as we said before, positive gravitropism, or we can call it geotropism. Okay, this is the same one as we did before. The shoot is positively phototrophic because it responds to light and goes in the direction of the light. And in the control setup, the clinostat, or we can just say clinostat, no need to say clinostat turntable, cancels the effect. Okay, that's why you can see it in the control, it goes in one direction only. Okay, so on the same plant, directly self-pollination, does not rely on pollinating agent, will be self-pollination. From one flower to another flower on a different plant, that's why it's cross-pollination. Reduces the ability, it's self-pollination. Produces genetic variation, is cross-pollination. Okay, how did I know gravitropism? Because we're testing the roots, that's one way, and we can see that we put it in a way that's horizontal, where gravity is down, and we can see the roots bending downwards. And we have the clinostat, which cancels the effect of gravity. Roots showed positive gravitropism. Okay, this is the process of fertilization. We said the pollen lands. So 2 is pollen grain, 1 is the stigma. The pollen lands on the stigma. We have a pollen tube that forms into the ovule. The function of structure 2 is to transfer the male gamete to the female gamete. Okay, these are just examples. Specify the type of asexual reproduction. Make sure you know the examples. Okay, these are potatoes, we call them tubers, onions are bulbs, and then we have runners and rhizomes. Okay, so just be aware of the examples. Ability of an organism to detect and respond to stimuli, we already said it before, it is sensitivity. Okay, here since the shoot grew in the direction of the light, we said it's positively phototropic, and the clinostat, remember we said it rotates, so every side of the shoot is exposed equally to sunlight. And which hormone we said? It's the auxin is responsible for plant elongation. Here we want to determine if it's sexual or asexual reproduction. We already talked about that, so I'm just gonna skip over it. Okay, so why did we say positive phototropism is important for photosynthesis? Because in photosynthesis we need sunlight, and also it brings flowers into exposed position for insect and wind pollination. Because if the stems are going to grow away from sunlight, they're going to be towards gravity, for example, it will be hard for insects and for wind to pick their pollen up. So that's why positive phototropism is important in shoots. Okay, remember we said auxins are produced at the shoot tip, and they usually accumulate at the shaded side, so the cells elongate, causing the stem to bend towards light. Tropic response to light, whenever you see light, phototropism, gravity, gravitropism or geotropism, plant stem, positive phototropism, and negative geotropism, while plant roots, positive gravitropism and negative positive gravitropism and negative phototropism. Okay, while we still have one more type of tropic responses, which is photoperiodism, which is the changes in day length. Okay, so just know these three terms: phototropism, geotropism or gravitropism, and photoperiodism. Okay, so because they said passive movement, higher concentration to lower concentration, I'm directly going to think of diffusion. Okay? Okay, increasing the distance. If I increase the distance, of course, diffusion will decrease. Increasing the temperature, the particles will move faster, so diffusion will increase. Decreasing the pressure, also the rate will decrease, and decreasing the concentration gradient, it will decrease. Okay, this is old material also how water transport occurs. We have the soil, remember the root hairs, then the epidermis, cortex, endodermis, and then the xylem vessels. And remember, mineral ions are transported by active transport. So since it's active transport, it requires, what do you guys think it requires? It requires energy, and it goes against a concentration gradient. Okay, why did we choose the second one? Because if we look at the roots, we said they have positive gravitropism, so they're going to grow in the direction of gravity, which is downward, while light is going to be coming from the top, and shoots show positive phototropism, so they will grow upward. Okay, what's the stimulus? It's a detected change either externally or internal environment that causes a response. Sensitivity, we said, is the ability of organisms to detect these and respond to the stimuli, while a tropic response is the growth or movement of our organism depending to environmental stimulus. And remember, we said the three tropic responses are, make sure to say them before I do, they're going to be light, gravity, and day length. Okay, here are the advantages and disadvantages of sexual and asexual reproduction. An advantage of sexual reproduction leads to high adaptability, as we said. Another advantage helps an individual spread in a suitable environment. And that's for asexual. While disadvantage of sexual reproduction takes time and energy. Disadvantage of asexual leads to low genetic variation. Okay, to make chlorophyll, we need magnesium, and to make proteins, we need nitrate. This is also from the material we previously did. So that's it for today's video. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching. Best of luck on your exam, and see you soon.